The 1940s changed radio forever as jazz and swing rocked the headsets, featuring artists such as Duke Ellington, Frank Sinatra, and Judy Garland, something this country had yet to see. President Franklin Roosevelt also introduced a new form of radio addresses, where he communicated directly to the citizens in his fireside chats.
Our dollar is now altogether too much influenced by the internal policies of other nations. Therefore, the United States must take firmly in its own hands.
Movies during this decade were based mainly on the war and conveyed strong themes of heroism. Holocaust films were created and were the most effective way to educate the public and future generations about the horrors of anti-Semitism that was going through Europe. Often, propaganda was used in these movies, as well as newspapers and television, to aid the support of war against the Germans. Many paintings were also based on World War II, and photography was used a lot in this time period to push the main goals of the 1940s and war efforts forward. In the 1940s, Levittowns were created by William Levitt for returning veterans and their families, offering attractive living conditions compared to crammed city homes and apartments. Known as cookie-cutter developments, these communities were all created to look the same and came with modern living appliances. Fashion of this time period was modeled after utility clothes, featuring squared shoulders, narrow hips, and skirts which would end below the knee for women. For men, it was common to see a formal suit and tie, keeping a presentable look all the time. You had to keep up with your fellow neighbors, otherwise you were deemed uncivilized back in the 40s.
Coming out of the 30s, the U.S. was recovering from the Great Depression. President Franklin Roosevelt implemented corporations to help the country recover in the long run, but also established corporations that would give direct relief to the people of the 40s.
The most notable natural disaster of the 40s happened in Woodward, Oklahoma, when an F5 tornado killed 181 people in 1947. This was a record count for the state of Oklahoma at the time, where the total damage estimated was about $747,850,050, shocking the nation. After the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in 1944, the U.S. isolated Japanese Americans to camps during the remainder of Japan's involvement in World War II.
I had been feeling fine, but as I went through the gates, I suddenly got a very depressed feeling, and I felt like a prisoner. There were guards at the gate, and it was all fenced in. The barracks all looked dirty, and I hated to think of having to live there for any length of time. This was the start of my life in a concentration camp.
There were posters of Japanese people with menacing faces, making them look as though every Japanese American was a security threat. Rationing and the movement of women into the workforce were also major events in the 1940s. It was difficult to get around back in the 1940s because gas was one of the many things being rationed so they could use it more in the war. Food stamps were implicated to redeem food at the store instead of using money in the 40s. The U.S. had implemented the draft in preparation for their involvement in World War II. Not many Americans knew of the Holocaust camps that the Nazis had established in the early 1940s. Women were allowed to work in factories during World War II for the first time. Rosie the Riveter was an angle the government took on getting women more involved in the workplace. There were posters and commercials made featuring Rosie, which made women want to work more because it related more to them. Women also wanted to work before this too, but men wouldn't let them. So when the war came and men shipped out, we needed people to repair boats and planes as well as work in factories, a role which soon was filled by women. Women in the workforce was a key factor in the success that the United States had in World War II, defeating the Axis powers.
In the 1940s, President Franklin Roosevelt established relief programs in the U.S. to help the struggling economy. He established programs such as the Emergency Banking Relief Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the Public Works Administration, the Civil Works Administration, and the Works Progress Administration, all to bring immediate relief to the unemployed citizens who were struggling to get out of the Great Depression. He also put into effect recovery and reform programs which helped the country in the long run as their economy began to rise once more. The 1940s was a major part for most of World War II as well. The Manhattan Project helped produce some of the greatest technology we have today in the nuclear science field. The German Nazi Empire became immense and the effects of their reign of terror would be felt for centuries by the ancestors of the 12 million that the Nazis eradicated, whether it be in battle, in concentration camps set up by the Germans, or the brutal, humiliating killings that the Germans would do daily. The United States teamed with the Allied forces to wipe out the Axis powers in Germany, Japan, and Italy. Later in the war, the U.S., which was responding to the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7, 1939, dropped its first and second nuclear bombs as the war was ending. The first of which was on Hiroshima, Japan, and the next being on Nagasaki, Japan. This then soon led to an Allied victory in World War II.